therapist perspective, what are people still getting wrong? Or what's the growth opportunity within your topic of presentation today?
We've got lots of room for growth. We need to educate ourselves, and we need to make sure that we're looking for places, looking for our clients to be diagnosed properly. And there's lots of space for specialists in this area. Truly, truly, truly.
What I have found in my field that clinicians get wrong is they're not educated in proper terminology and how to communicate with clients, and also the ignorance of eating disorder training due to fear and intimidation. So I always like to say, if it's not in your area, please refer out. There's a lot of wonderful eating disorder clinicians in the community.
For me, I think what we get wrong is that we just look for how trans kids are not dying, especially with research. And for me, it's like, great, so they're alive because we call them their name and their pronouns, but that's like bare human decency. We call everybody else their name and their pronouns that they want. So for me, it's like, okay, what do we do to help them thrive? How do we, I look at college students, how do we keep them in school? But not just in school, how do we help them be magna cum laude? How do we help them be professionals out in the world? And so from a therapist perspective, how do we just work on not just the bare human decency, but then above that? And I feel like with trans kiddos, especially with research, we're just worried about how to keep them alive. There's so much more than that, so.
Are we going all the way down?
Yeah, all of it.
I think speaking to a little bit of the cultural aspect, I'm going to take again this example that I used with Angela Caldwell. I think it's important for therapists to recognize that, you know, I might be 5 shades darker than you, and we should talk about that, or 5 shades paler. And I think that from there you can do that assessment and figure out what the client's needs are based on the cultural component. And I don't know if that's being addressed that much in therapy.
I think for me, for the teen population, it's lack of proper assessment. I see a lot of therapists that jump too quickly to using coping skills. That first session, I feel anxious, let's talk about coping skills, before really assessing the root, where it's coming from, or how we can create a proper treatment plan around it.
Frequently, I think that what people get wrong, or just clinicians in the field, is wonderful and great, is just receiving, having an open heart to what Latinx population will give you. Sometimes they'll bring handmade objects or food, and they just want to love you and just give you stuff. And unless you're the Grinch, with the heart 2 sizes too small, you can wait till Christmas and we're good, but otherwise receive, be open.
Sorry, one more thing. I think too, treating people who are trans and gender non-conforming and LGBT from a trauma model first, and then if they don't have trauma, then don't treat them that way. Because most of us do have trauma, the vast majority of us, and I feel like we forget that piece of the puzzle. And so if you are not trauma informed and you're working with especially a trans person, consider referring out to a trans person, but then also consider referring out to somebody who is trauma informed, because a lot of our experiences are traumatic all day, every day. So just making sure that that's a part of your thought process when taking on a client.
I have one more thing I'd like to add. Making sure that you have an office that accommodates all body shapes and sizes, as well as disabled people. I know I said to a colleague who I went to see their office recently, and I said, you know what, these chairs in the waiting room wouldn't work for someone in a larger body. And she says, Robin, they could see someone else. That was the wrong answer to me. So, and also being very mindful about the magazines and the reading materials you have in your waiting room, not having tabloid magazines. I mean, I have time, I have travel, nothing that indicates foods, bodies, so I think that's really something to take a look at oneself professionally.
Do we have any questions from the audience? So please wait for the microphones to come over, but keep your hands up so that way our runners can see you.
Hi. Well, Sage was talking about how important it is to not see trans kids or trans people as that's who they are and that's what they're all about. And I'm wondering if what you would think about, Jessica would think about that as far as culture. I mean, are we primarily all about our culture, and how critical it is that we see someone from exactly our culture?
That is a really, really good question. Put me on the spot. Pretty tough. I just think that all of these aspects of people's lives are very integrated, and we can't ignore any part of it. And I think that you have to use, again, the skill of observation that I mentioned earlier, alongside with being critical and asking lots of questions. I think you just have to be real with that person and let them be real with you. So I wouldn't say that we have to, you know.
Let's go, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Do I have to repeat that whole thing?
No.
Okay. And then I lost my train of thought. But going back to it, I think that it's asking the client and really meeting them where they're at.
And what's important to them.
So, question for Robin about the health at every size. I have the intuitive eating book, and I'm curious, like for someone who is diabetic, and if they eat too much of this or that, they could die or go blind or whatever. What do you say then?
So my training, I used to be the cardiac dietitian at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, and then was in the Department of Gastrology. So when I see individuals with medical issues, I approach it from an intuitive eating, weight-inclusive lens. And when you're asking about from a glucose standpoint, if an individual is using a meter and they're checking their blood sugar, we will discuss not only how are they feeling when their blood sugar is at 215, and we say, oh, I feel fine. Well, they're used to running at a higher octane, essentially. So I like to present options, but I would never, and I know many registered dietitians that work in the diabetes arena and that put people on militant meal plans and diets, and I will say I think the reason that I am successful is I'm allowing my clients to have freedom and really develop a new relationship with their body. I'll say, your head is in Tahiti and your body's in Mexico. Let's, reconnect and reunite with each other and get to know one another. So I think fear is a great motivator, which brings people into my office many times, but also it's being able for them to really try to pay attention, because there's fear with paying attention to how something feels physically and emotionally. And reducing labs is something I'm successful with, but again, I really like to keep it open-ended.
We have one last question.
I have one for Katie. Thanks so much for speaking up for the teens. I am curious, I also run teen groups. I'm curious about how you handle and how you train your other people to handle confidentiality between parent and kid.
How I handle confidentiality between group members, you're saying?
No, between parent and kid, because the parents are going to
I see.
want it.
So we do a comprehensive intake for anyone who joins one of our groups. So it's not just that they join onto group before any orientation or meeting with the client and the parent. And so part of that process is letting them know, just like we would for individual, that we may share themes of what we're doing in group. I share on Facebook what the topic of group is each week, so parents can stay informed about what they're learning or what we're working on. But I certainly don't share the literal content of what is shared in group, because that's protected under confidentiality.
Including drug use.
What's that?
I'm wondering about including drug use.
I can't.
Including substance use?
Oh, I see. So, I mean, for me, it's all about imminent risk. If somebody's smoking weed or drinking and there's no imminent risk, I'm not going to share that with parents. But also in the group context, we don't glorify drugs or alcohol. So unless you're saying I have a target behavior that I want to work on and reduce, we're not talking about drugs and alcohol in group. So I'm really mindful about not coming in and laughing about being wasted or how fun something was and how that promotes an unhealthy behavior for other group members.
A big round of applause.